I am very excited and honored to welcome tonight two speakers. We have Adam Sarvana, who was a communications director for the Congressional Progressive Caucus, co-chair Rep. I'm going to probably butcher his name, Raul Grijalva, and you can
Nailed
correct
it.
me if I'm wrong. From 2009 to 2015, and for the House Committee on Natural Resources, Democratic staff from 2015 to 22. In March of 2022, he accepted a presidential appointment to serve as Director of Communications for Admiral Rachel Levine, the Assistant Secretary for Health at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. In 2024, he was promoted to Director of Communications and Public Engagement, a position he held until January of this year. He focuses on connecting government officials with community members, civic leaders, and people with local expertise so that policy is made and executed with public buy-in. In February of this year, with several fellow HHS employees, he co-founded the Health and Human Services Impacts Group to document the consequences of the Trump administration's layoffs and budget cuts and to connect impacted staff with helpful resources and storytelling opportunities. So I want you guys to hear the full background, just so that you know that what they were doing for the government and then what they're doing to lead now on this issue. And then I'm also thrilled to bring Aisha Coffey, who is living proof that when harnessed strategically, rage can be be a renewed purpose. I totally feel that one. Now, former government communications professional, Aisha has over 15 years of experience at premier federal agencies, including the Food and Drug Administration and the National Institutes of Health. As the current spokesperson for Federal Workers Against DOGE, might want to check that out, everybody. She represents more than 1,000 federal employees across 20 agencies who are advocating for federal workforce protections and effective government, minus the fascism filter. She has appeared on national TV, speaks at rallies, and works the halls of Congress to build coalitions that truly serve the American people. Aisha is becoming a powerful voice for change. Positioned squarely at the intersection of federal policy and real-time political advocacy, she embodies what good troublemakers, and hey, our members are known as troublemakers, so she fits right in here, people. What good troublemakers do best: challenge the status quo, defend democracy, and raise their voices for a better future for America. So, really thrilled to have them here with us tonight. I'm going to spotlight all of us, and then we will get started with our questions. So, we'll bring up Aisha, we'll bring up Adam, and we'll bring up me. Okay, welcome to you both. um,
For having us.
Can you start by telling us, and Aisha, we'll start with you. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your job with the federal government, what specifically you did, what department? I know that you had multiple roles, but maybe starting with what you were doing before you were no longer working there.
Well, I started at NIH a long time ago, back in 2010. There, I was pretty much doing advertising campaigns for workforce recruitment, reaching out to scientists. The word I'm about to use here is not popular, depending on who you ask these days, but reaching out to underrepresented populations, minority populations, DEI, as we would call it, to, I guess, enthrall them with the idea of working for NIH. And also just, circulating newsletters internally. The bulk of my federal experience comes from FDA, of course, where I worked across two different agencies. I started at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health back in 2016. And then later on, after the birth of my baby, I moved on to the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. Uh, and there, I would say I would basically summarize my job as taking that scientific information that pretty much no one understands except for rocket scientists and, I guess, doctors, and breaking it down to be digestible for the American public. Warning, of course, about the dangers of devices and some drugs, so safety comms, and pretty much running the campaigns for opioid disposal. If you've ever heard of Remove the Risk, which was a big opioid disposal campaign at FDA. Our FDA Health Playbook, which also, provided information about more opioid disposal and safe drug disposal overall, as well as sunscreen health and safety. And in addition, if you are familiar with any of the I would say initiatives coming out of FDA, I would say in the last 4 years, about since the time COVID started regarding our FDA overdose prevention framework. I was the lead comms person for that across the agency. So that was the breadth of my work, and just kind of making sure that the American people were safe and that their drugs were safe and devices and that they knew what they needed to know.
I'm going to turn to Adam with the same question. Aisha, I don't know. I know we talked about, I'm hearing some people or seeing some people in the chat saying they're having a hard time hearing you. Can
Sorry.
you do try the headphones or try, I just thought,
Yeah, I'm going to try the headphones first. It's not
okay.
cute, but we're going to go for
We'll
it.
give Adam a chance to answer while you get adjusted. Sorry, we'll see how that goes. If not, it's
Mhm.
fine. We'll work with it.
All
Adam,
right.
what about you? Tell us a little bit about your jobs with the federal government and what you were doing specifically, especially at the time you left.
Sure thing. So I mean, for those who didn't, ever work in DC or work in Congress, Congress can be a very opaque place. But as communications director for Congressman Grijalva, this sort of predates my work at HHS. But actually, there's a sort of interesting through line here that I do want to talk a bit about. He represents Southern Arizona, which is where I grew up and where I just recently moved back to a week ago. So I did see some Tucson people in the chat. And thank you very much for joining us. I do appreciate it. Um, he represents Southern Arizona. And so, the personal issues that he worked on in his office were sort of one suite of things like immigration, conservation, the economy. And he was co chair at the time of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, which handles issues across the country, right? And so when I joined in 2009, we were in the middle of negotiating the Affordable Care Act. We were talking about the fate of a public option. And so as communications director, there's just a lot that goes into that, right? Booking interviews, drafting op-eds, just kind of generally getting the word out about our position, why we're trying to accomplish the things we are. So this is not a workshop on working in Congress, but just to say that I do not come from a health background. And when I moved to the Natural Resources Committee from his personal office, he became ranking member and later chair. And this was an opportunity to work more closely on the kind of set of issues that I'm personally most motivated by. Things like climate change, environmental justice, environmental health. My father worked for the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality for most of his career, and I grew up hearing about things like water conservation even when I was very young. So this was just always on my mind. And this is a lot of what I worked on in Congress. When I went to HHS, that was not because I had an agenda to go get an MPH at night or anything. It was because I had always seen health professionals and sort of environmental advocates not speaking with each other and not speaking the same language and sort of not necessarily professionally recognizing that climate change is a health issue, right? And it's not just a sort of environmental or conservation issue or not something you only care about if you're a green person. It affects everyone, right? And in Tucson, extreme heat is going to be an even bigger issue than it already is. Drought is going to have impacts on not just on things like our air conditioning, but on food availability. So I saw a lot of opportunities at a place like HHS to work on the issues that I cared about in a way that I felt like was being sort of under developed and underrepresented at the federal level. And so the 3 years that I spent at HHS, I spent a lot of time kind of with that same lens on a lot of what we did, right? Not looking at it through the eyes of someone who went through a sort of classic medical training program or a statistics based program, but just as a more sort of like, what is the public experiencing sort of attitude? Because in comms, you really have to think like, not just what do I think of the substance in terms of a white paper, but like, what are we saying about this and how is it landing? And what are people telling us about what they see and what they need? Like comms is a very media relations is just one part of a toolbox in engaging the public. And I think the people who are sort of worst at comms just think of themselves as people who are like standing between themselves and the media and their boss, rather than treating it as a means to an end. And so at HHS, I mean, I won't belabor this point too much, but at HHS, when I went to the Assistant Secretary for Health, that office oversees many offices, including what were then the newly created offices of climate change and health equity and Office of Environmental Justice. And I saw those as an opportunity for people who worked across the department and even across the federal government, frankly, to work more closely together on issues that will affect the entire spectrum of sort of federal affairs, right? If you're building a new airport, what impact is that going to have on air quality? What impact is that going to have on the air quality of people who live near the fence line, which is probably going to be low socioeconomic status? That's a health issue, right? That's not just an economic issue or a transportation issue. All these things are related in ways that I think have become very siloed. Unfortunately, and has contributed to the federal government kind of feeling very unresponsive to people because the way the government is structured does not represent how they experience these problems in their own lives, right? They don't want to have to spend all day or a week going to half a dozen different departments, talking to different agencies that collect different kinds of data. They just want their problem solved. And that has always been sort of my approach is like, I'm not coming at this as a wonk. I'm coming at this as someone who talks to the public mostly and talks to reporters. And they do not want the white paper answer. They want to know, like, what are you doing and why and who did you get input from? And so my experience up until this January was to kind of try to make the government that sort of, from the people to the people sort of experience by asking people what their experiences were, and accounting for that with the data that we did have and not just sort of taking stories at face value, but understanding like in some communities, people are having these specific problems that just fall through these bureaucratic cracks because nobody thinks it's their job to fix it. Right. And I'll talk more about that later because I think there are a lot of experiences that kind of illustrate the point. But that was sort of what I was doing at HHS. What I was trying to make the most of the experience was not just like waiting for a media call to come in, but proactively treating public engagement as a means to this end of making government more effective. And then Trump won, and now here I am. I left Washington. I do not have a federal job anymore. I just relocated back home with my family. I'm very glad to be back in Tucson, but I am trying to be useful where I can.
Well, let's talk about being separated from the government. Now, Aisha, I know you got the headset on now. We're going to see what happens. So can you walk us through how you were let go from your job? Like, what was the timeline? What explanations or lack of explanation were you given?
Well, hopefully everyone can hear me now. All right. Well, I'll walk you through it minute by minute quickly. It was 6 something in the morning. I was waking up to get my kid ready for school, and my phone was just blowing up. I had tons of text messages, and usually I don't check those in the morning. You have kids, the mad dash in the morning to get them out the door is just difficult. And then I finally said, wow, this phone keeps going off. Let me look. And then I'm seeing tons of text messages from my coworkers saying, hey, we just got fired. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I don't have time to look now. So this is 6 in the morning. Apparently, we got fired around 5:15 a.m. It came through an email sent to our work address. So as I came back home, I looked at my email and there it was, a nice email basically saying, oh, as of today, happy April Fools. It didn't say that, but it probably should have. It just pretty much, it was a very much form letter. It had tons of incorrect information in it. It gave us information about, your standing as far as retention register, which they did not do. So there was no standing. It talked about my date of service when I began federal service, which was also wrong. It had a bunch of names on there that you could contact if you needed any assistance with what was happening. Of course, half the names on there did not answer. And the person who actually was notated on the letter had actually quit federal service a month prior. So that was pretty much a mess. But that was April 1st. We were immediately put on admin leave. And admin leave, for those who don't know, you're paid, but you're not allowed to work. You're not allowed to really sign into your computer and work with people. We still had access to our computers, so we could still check our emails and complete any trainings or anything that we had to do like that. But you're not allowed to like go to your meetings or anything like that. You're on leave. That was chaotic. They did not give a list of who was being put on admin leave to anyone. So people were finding out that you're essentially RIFT, as we would call it, reduction in force, through word of mouth. Just a, hey, did you get one? Yeah, I did. Who in your office is still there? No one. They ripped the whole office. They ripped my entire office. Our office director.
How many people are in your office? Just curious. Like how many people?
It was about 130.
Okay.
They kept about, I want to say 10 to 15, but that was because they are part of the Commission Corps Public Health Service. So when they are RIFT, they're separated through a different type of mechanism. They have to be reassigned. I'm surprised that the administration is holding true to that, but they left those. But the other 120 so of us were RIFT at once, including my office director. This was sudden for all of us. No one knew who was getting RIFT. If you got the email, you assume, oh, so that's how that happened. And that was in April. Of course, there were a flurry of court cases, a flurry of preliminary injunctions, a flurry of appeals. And we were held in stasis for a while, as the original separation date was going to be June 2nd. We had an injunction, it held, it got appealed, it held, it went to the Supreme Court, and we know what happened there. So I got a final separation notice on July 14th, a couple weeks ago. I'm assuming I got a final separation notice. Apparently, they sent it at 5 o'clock p.m. and then locked everyone out of their computer 30 minutes later. I was nowhere near my computer, so I did not even get to get in and get my notice. But it was only 4 sentences basically saying that due to the preliminary injunction uh, being struck down because of SCOTUS decision, the Supreme Court of the United States decision, we were effectively separated that moment. But I then got a letter in the mail a couple of days later and said the same. Of course, it had the thank you for your service to the American government and American people on it. And then that's pretty much what it was. We got a UPS letter a few days later, I want to say last week, which was supposed to detail my severance amount, which is wrong. And a lot of us are finding out our severance amounts are way, way less than what we thought. Luckily, mine's is in the double digits, but not so bad. I know people personally who are 40 and 50,000 short. And of
Wow.
course, there is nobody to contact about it. They left no instruction.
You basically have to get a lawyer and sue or something if you were going to try to do that, which takes money and time. And
Yeah, we're
let's
part of the union and they're trying, but as you know, the unions are bogged down. They are and I mean dozens of cases at one time going through each union. So it's only so much they can do. And I think a lot of federal employees, at least the ones I know, are kind of at the point where I guess we are going to have to get a lawyer, which of course is added expense at a time when you pretty much just lost your job. So big fun, big fun.
Adam, what about you? Was the process as chaotic as what Aisha was describing?
It was different, and I wouldn't even say there's much of a process to discuss. In my case, I'll explain this for people who are curious, but I kind of have a couple points to add that I think may actually be more interesting for people. I was a political appointee as opposed to a career staffer. So Aisha and many of the other people she's describing are going through this extremely chaotic, we'll say illegal. The courts have yet to kind of weigh in finally, but they keep kind of ping-ponging back and forth depending on the case and who brought it and what jurisdiction and venue and everything. But the career staff are the ones who have been there through many administrations in some cases, right? People I worked with, even in my own office, had been there since George W. Bush. I think one person was even there before. And that kind of has some implications for your work and your performance metrics, how you are reviewed, how you are compensated, how you accrue leave, all of that stuff. Appointees are different in many ways, and the ins and outs of it are not that interesting, and are frankly probably going to change. I mean, after Trump, a lot of this stuff is being kind of torn up as we go here. But the idea, if you're a political appointee, it is at least understood that, like, look, I don't work for HHS, I work for President Biden at the end of the day, right, on paper. If he loses and there's a change of administration, it is known in advance, look, you're out on January 20th, just like everybody else is. In some cases, appointees can apply for career positions and will often get them because they have relevant expertise, they're interested in the work, they believe in the mission, they want to stay. That's not always the case. That's not typical, although it's certainly done. I didn't pursue that option in part because I was very afraid of what Trump was going to do to HHS anyway. But also, like I said, because like I don't come from HHS, right? I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, and getting career work at HHS is competitive and rightly so. And it just kind of wasn't for me. And so on January 20th, that was it. It was a clean break, and I was out. About a month before all this other stuff started happening. Right, there were these waves that kept kind of hitting different departments, different agencies, one by one, two by two. And people were sort of looking at this with concern. I remember very early on, there was talk about canceling a lot of NIH, grants and contracts. And people were saying, oh, is this kind of sign of things to come? And even at that point, I will say some of the career staff were saying like, no, this happens all the time. They review contracts when the new president comes in. They put everything under a pause just to look it over, make sure it's consistent with their policy priorities and what they care about and what they want. But then, most of this stuff usually goes through. And the ease and the speed with which they just started saying, no, 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 you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, I think, and Aisha, I think will agree with me, hit a lot of career staff doubly hard, not just because they were personally impacted, but because they did not expect this. They were not prepared for what happened. They did not, and this again is something I hope we get a little more chance to talk about, that like, had there been more advance warning, had there been more expression of need to prepare legally, financially, in advance, coming either from the, pick your poison, right? The DNC, the Biden people, myself included, frankly, attorneys, high class action attorneys, people who do this stuff for a living. There are some very high powered labor lawyers, all over the country. Had there been more of a sense of like, we need to not just say what Trump is going to do as policy that's concerning. He means what he says in Project 2025. We need to prepare for loss of staff capacity. We need to prepare for loss of data. We need to prepare for loss of contracts. None of that was really very seriously done in advance. And that is a big reason why this hit as hard as it did, is because no one was ready with push button legal or financial strategies from the get-go. If you think about a strike, it is a very rough analogy. There are strike funds set up in advance.
Right.
If we'd had something like, let's help out the people we know are about to get wiped out. These are the people who we are going to say are the real pillars of our democracy, right? The people holding up this government. They're all about to be fired en masse, or they're about to be subject to these absurd, loyalty oaths and restrictions on their work. Half of them are probably going to quit of their own volition, either out of necessity or sort of financial desperation or other. What was done to prepare for this moment? We're all playing, even now, we're all playing catch up. And so the fact that I was, I knew 4 months in advance that I was going to be let go because we lost the election. I won't say that I was running around with my, like a chicken with my head cut off, but I think there were people who were saying, even November, December, like, what's happening? Now, are we just going to kind of wait to see what happens come January, February? Or like, is there a plan in motion? So I think that is a bit of the takeaway here, is that now everyone wants to say like how horrible this decimation of the federal government was. Well, they put it all on paper, and 1 or 2 appointees are not going to make the difference, but there is a very large, donor apparatus, political apparatus, legal, you name it. There are a lot of people with a lot of power in this country who I think, had they seen around the corner, might have done a lot more between election day and inauguration day to at least soften the blow, or to create structures that might have absorbed some of these unemployed people, or absorbed some of their knowledge, right? Or created a center to start doing some kind of continuity of government work, right? Story collection, data mapping. Who is being impacted? Where is this happening? What are the financial consequences? A lot of the people that Aisha and I have worked with have been doing this stuff on a totally DIY basis, right? There are people who just happen to be data scientists who are building their own maps with whatever data they can get their hands on. At a high level, who is doing this? That's the story of my separation, is what preparation was made for where we are now? The answer is not much, unfortunately. And that's I think been very frustrating for a lot of us.
Let me talk to you both then about the loss of expertise that we're seeing from the departments that you left from, and then I'm sure you just have knowledge of your former departments as well and where this is happening. So we'll go back to you, Aisha. So can you tell us, like, how does this loss of like experienced public servants like yourself and your colleagues, how is that going to impact not only the functioning of your department, but the impact on like the American public as a whole?
Well, you're seeing it now. Not long after we were sent the original RIF notice back in April, I saw a news story come out about the fact that, of course, there was an E. coli outbreak on lettuce. It was being reported almost 2 months after it started. Would not happen traditionally. One thing I did not mention earlier, when this administration came in, something that was unlike every other administration, I've been there since the first Obama term. We always have a comms pause. As the new administration comes in, gets brought up to speed, it usually lasts a week, maybe 2. This one lasted for 2 months almost. And even after that, we were not allowed to communicate the way that we typically would. Everything had to go through HHS, and they were definitely shooting down some of the more typical things that we would usually say and warn about. So the E. coli outbreak we missed. You may have heard that, once Makari finally took his stand, I guess, as commissioner, and he and RFK Jr. put out some kind of report, maybe late April. Usually that report goes through a ton of offices of comms people, doctors, scientists, and somehow that report was made by AI and referenced all false data, which would not have happened. Um, Even now at FDA alone, medical reviewers, drug reviewers, they review the drug applications. These are a timeline process. They do have deadlines as far as statutes that they have to meet, as far as getting these applications approved and either, issuing a response or so forth. I think 600 plus at last count have either quit or had to recuse themselves because they're looking for jobs in private sector. And of course, you're reviewing applications from private sector. So who's reviewing your applications? You're seeing what's happening. And I'll touch on my experience at NIH. At NIH, I worked in the actual center that Fauci led, the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID. NIAID, great center, one of the biggest centers over there at NIH. They're having a huge brain drain. Like the grants are gone. If there are no grants, there's no research going on. There are no researchers. They're leaving. This has been unprecedented, of course. Like, yes, government. So there is no government agency that was ever fully staffed. That does not happen. If so, it's a unicorn agency, and the leader of every other agency would probably gather around them in awe and ask them, how did they do it? It just does not happen. Before this administration came in, we always had a retention problem. You know that the selling point with government jobs were always stability because we took less pay than private sector. So yeah, we had a few more holidays and days off. Yes, we had a bit more stability and a lot more workforce protections, but the trade-off was that we weren't in private industry usually making a lot more money than we were making there. That was the trade-off. So we always had a recruitment and retention problem, especially in later years as the tech sector kind of took off. And you want the best, the brightest, those young scholars coming out of Stanford, Harvard, the Ivies and the other elite schools. A lot of them would have to be pretty much persuaded, begged to come to government agencies, because why give up that income and that potential money that you can make to come serve the public. So those who did come join federal service, of course, were doing it on behalf of, wanting to work along some of the top researchers and doctors and scientists in the nation, wanting to give back to the American people, wanting to serve. That is just, that's not happening now. The brain drain is something I don't think anyone can actually imagine the scale of right now. You would have to see it. Even before we were rift, I was seeing, typically you get those, hi, this week will be my last week, at FDA. You get those maybe once or twice a month. I was seeing multiple some days, and it's just fed up, because between the rich people and the people who are just like, I can't survive under this, you're just losing the best and the brightest. So I do think that the future of our scientific and research agencies and of regulatory agencies, all under HHS, are just in a great amount of danger as to being able to fulfill their mission. And sadly, it seems that was done purposely. The idea is that they can't fulfill their mission anymore, and that's just sad to see.
Yeah, it is shocking to see, like you said, the brain drain and what we're losing there. So Adam, what's your take on that in terms of like how is the impact on the agencies, and how is that going to impact the American public?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to recognize that even while Aisha and I come from HHS, I mean, the same thing is being repeated across the entire federal government, right? I have friends at many agencies. Some were appointees, some were careers, some are still careers. And you can kind of pick an agency, pick a department, and extend everything Aisha just said across their mission. People who are, I don't want to name names, obviously, I'm not trying to get any of my friends in trouble here. So I'll just kind of pick a few off the wall examples. I mean, let's say at the Department of Transportation, right? You're mapping roadway safety. You don't work there anymore. You work for the Department of Veterans Affairs, you're doing loan processing for veterans. You don't work there anymore. You're doing, you work at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. You're making sure that student loans being offered to, young people or single mothers are not predatory. You don't work there anymore. And the people who don't work there anymore, their positions are being filled as often as not by people who just happen to still be at the agency, regardless of whether they have any relevant expertise. I mean, this is a lot of what I've heard from many, many people I've talked to in this multiple conversations. It's not so much just that, so and so number of people are no longer working here. That's bad enough in and of itself, just because of the loss of capacity. But it's the fact that the Trump administration treats every warm body at a department as interchangeable, right? If you were doing statistical modeling on whatever for a year, that means that you can now study the effects of chemicals on the brain because we just need warm bodies in the office. They have this way of sort of saying, well, don't we have enough bureaucrats? Can't we spare some bureaucrats? And I do want to say something about what Aisha was saying a minute ago about the sort of perceived trade-off, right, between working in the private and the public sector. I think the problem with a lot of early messaging on the loss of federal workforce was that people tended to treat this as like, how dare they do this to these people who are supposed to have these stable contracts? But if you work in the private sector, you've been through what, 2-3 rounds of massive layoffs, whatever your industry. People have seen tens of thousands of people being let go willy-nilly by, CEOs who didn't think twice, right? They were just thinking bottom line. Those layoffs don't even improve the bottom line long term, which is a totally different discussion. But people are used to thinking of jobs and individual, positions as just fungible. It's just these like straws in the wind. Whereas when we talked government layoffs, the outrage was supposedly on behalf of these people who are like, well, but their jobs were supposed to be safe. Nobody responded to that. That's not what anybody was thinking. Was like, oh, well, you're right. Their jobs were supposed to be safe, even if mine isn't. Nobody cares about that. What we needed to be talking about all along was, here's what this is actually going to cost you in your own community, right? If you're cutting Medicaid, here's what that's going to cost you in your own community. That's going to cost rural communities healthcare services. That's going to mean more suicides, literally. I mean, there's been coverage on the consequences of all these cuts being made, not just in terms of the workforce, but in terms of the services that are actually no longer going to be delivered. That all needed to be part of the package. And I think that this sort of beltway conversation got a little lost in the like labor contract aspect of this whole thing. That now I think people appreciate kind of what more is at stake here. I wish that had been done better on the front end. I think it would have saved us some PR hassle. But to sort of connect all of this just in a bit of a bow, I think, if you think of whatever issue you're dealing with in your own life, whether it's health, I mean, I kind of default to health having worked at HHS the past 3 years, but if it's like transit in your own community, it's very likely, right, depending on the size and scale of wherever you live, your state, your county, your city had been looking at kind of a long-term transportation plan. Maybe they were looking at building a light rail or building, transit to connect the university to the downtown or just whatever. There's going to be so much future capacity that is now lost. It's so hard to measure all of that here and now. We have to look at the next 10 to 15 to 20 years of things that are now not going to happen. Even if we start rebuilding aggressively in our next democratic governing moment, there is already all this money that just fell off a cliff. And so the consequences of people getting fired from agencies comes with the consequences of money no longer going out the door to state and federal governments, to contractors, to sub grantees. I met a guy, this is a very corny politician sounding thing to say, but when I was driving from DC to Tucson, as I said, I just moved back to Tucson a week ago, and I was driving out here with my family. We did a road trip as part of our move. And being a gregarious guy, right, I just started talking to people. We were stopped in Amarillo, and we went out to Lake Meredith, this lovely national recreation area where my daughter was going swimming, and we were viewing the sunset. We were having this lovely time. And I started talking to this guy who I noticed was like hiking up and down these peaks, just looking like he was sweating. And I just started asking him like, hey man, how's the view up there? And we started talking, and it turned out he actually helps run an organization called Amarillo Area Mental Health. And he was saying it was pretty clear. I mean, we were a little cagey with each other, right? But he was a friendly guy, and we started talking. And he may have very well been a Trump voter, but he started talking about how like the cuts they're making are cutting into my ability to work with people in the community. He's a grantee. He speaks a little bit of government lingo, but in so many words, he was saying like, what did I do? What did I do wrong? I think that's what a lot of people are starting to think now is, what did we do wrong? Why is this happening in our community? And the answer is that we have these two totally different conceptions of what the government exists to do, right? Democrats, I think, big picture, tend to think of it as this sort of means to an end of solving these problems, reducing burdens in people's lives. And the Trump administration views it much more as like, no, 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 this is going to be an instrument of, what we're all familiar with now, punishment of our perceived enemies. And what happens over here to the rest of these agencies that we can't weaponize is just as of no concern, right? If it falls apart, it falls apart. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Our main talking point here is that it needs to be a lot smaller across the board. And I think if you're talking to some, Republican friends, your family members at the holidays, just ask them, like, what do you want out of government? Is this what you want? Is this what we're getting? Not just you personally, but our community. Are we building the things we could be building? Are we helping the people we could be helping? Or are we just going to lose a lot of that capacity and kind of live with these diminished expectations? Because that, more than anything, diminished expectations is what this entire country is now looking at. And that's just, no one buys into that as a good outcome.
I'm curious if either of you have had conversations with elected officials, congresspeople, senators, like just in terms of, are they recognizing what's happening? What are they trying to do?
Well, I'll let Aisha go for it. I mean, I think the order is good. I don't want to jump in. So Aisha, please.
I have. I have for the last few months been making it my personal mission to reach out and speak to some electeds on not just at the federal level, but also at the state level. I'm not going to throw the names out only because I need them still on my side for a while, and they're aware. And I'll say that they have all been on the Democratic side, and so that's what I will say. They are aware. They feel as if their hands are kind of tied. They say that they're doing what they can. They're challenging it the best way they know how. They're challenging it in the public sphere. They're challenging it at the hearings. They're challenging it on the House floor. But that's kind of where it stops right now. And again, I think you've heard the phrase probably a million times as well. We are the minority. It's only what we can do right now. We're the minority. Very frustrating to hear, because I think that the American people right now, especially those who are suffering, not just the federal employees who have lost a job. I mean, we're just collateral damage, but those who are suffering from losses of service right now, especially as the Medicaid and Medicare and all the other cuts come into play, they don't want to hear that we're the minority. We're the minority. They want the Democrats to do something. So unfortunately, they feel that their hands are tied. They're working it the legal, procedural way. And my thoughts on that vary. It's not the way I like, and it's certainly not the way the other side of the aisle is playing it. But that is the game that they know how to play, and they feel, the few I've spoke to are pretty positive, I guess, and that the precedence of law and the legal way will bear out in the end. I think personally, I'm going to offer my opinion. I'm worried that there won't be anything to bear out by the time we reach the end. So
Yeah, I can totally understand that point. Adam, do you want to add to that in any way?
Yeah, I think, I mean, having worked in Congress as long as I have, I would say that the main thing, if you're a member of the public and you're tired of hearing that there's nothing we can do, I think there are two ways to think about that, right? One is, in the very, very short term, we don't have the votes to overturn these cuts, right? That is true, just as sort of, it doesn't really bear scrutiny. But what do we do in the intervening time between now and the next election, or between now and the next presidential election, or between now and the next redistricting? What are we doing? What connections are we building in this moment of struggle and crisis, right? How are we using every cut? How are we using every life that's being impacted to build something that helps us win and help us build something better next time? Because I think the mantra of, like, there's nothing we can do, we don't have the votes, is true as far as it goes, but it becomes this kind of permission to disengage from any larger power building project. And if you're in a community where maybe you're represented by a sort of self-described moderate Republican. I mean, that's actually my situation right now. I moved into a district represented by a man named Juan Siscomani, who's a self-described moderate Republican. He voted for the bill. He voted for the entire thing, the entire package of cuts. And he does this sort of Susan Collins routine about how difficult it is and how he sees the good and the bad. But at the end of the day, like, none of that matters. So what are you doing other than saying we don't have the votes? Okay, who are you connecting with? Who are you motivating? Who are you empowering? Who are you identifying as people who are likely to have stories to tell? And what platform are you giving them to tell their stories in public on behalf of whom? Like, this is just politics. This is just basic politics. You cannot just say, we lost in the moment. What do you expect from me? What I expect from you is some level of competence, networking, power building, intelligence, forthrightness, forward thinking. These are not abstract principles. This is like the difference between a functional government and a dysfunctional government. So if you're talking to an elected official, don't be satisfied with we don't have the votes. Ask, okay, then, what are you doing? Tell me what you're doing. If it sounds good, I'll help you, right? I'll volunteer. I'll knock on doors, but I need to hear what you are doing. I need to hear what you need me to do, right? If you and I want the same things, I need you to be strategic and effective, and you need that from me. So if your answer ends with, we don't have the votes, that's not how you're thinking about politics. We need someone who does think that way. And that's true across the board. That's true across the party. And if we don't have enough of that, we need more of it.
Well, I'm glad, because my question was going to be about what people can do. So this is reach out to people who are elected, ask what they're doing, ask how they're being helpful, how you can help to support this. I know we have a lot of questions in the chat because I'm seeing Julie's nodding her head. Yeah, lots of questions in the chat. Aisha, I know you wanted to share something. We'll let you share, and then we're going to bring Julie up and we're going to start doing answering the questions that you all are asking right now.
Okay, thank you, Julie. So, for those who aren't aware, I am the spokesperson for Federal Workers Against DOGE. We're a coalition of federal employees, allied organizations, some union representation, and a few electeds are actually in there as well, who are pretty much pushing back as best we can and providing resources to other federal employees and other allies on how to push back against basically a crumbling democracy. 2 weeks ago on July, I want to say 15th or 16th, I'm not sure, but 2 weeks ago, we partnered, we released a series, an audio series of 16 interviews of federal employees across different agencies, SSA, Social Security Administration, Environmental Protection Agency, FAA, everyone knows Federal Aviation Administration. And it pretty much is a compilation of federal employees warning about what's happening within their agencies since DOGE just came in, the structures that are being dismantled, the safeties and protections that are being cut and lost, and just everything that falls within the scope of that. I will also give a big thanks to Laura Nix and Mark Weiss for producing it. I'm going to place in the chat now. Hopefully you'll go through. I'll place a link. I'll tell everyone to please go check it out. You can check it out through bit.ly/Fed series. And also, I'll place a link to the social media guide to ask everyone to please amplify as much as you can, push it out. I think the more that we circulate this and people hear these perspectives from people within these agencies out of their own mouths, the better of an impact we'll be able to have. And hopefully it'll move the needle, touch some people we needed to touch, and spare somebody to action to help us push back on this. So I'll post the link shortly, and I invite you all to check it out, and we're open to any feedback that you have.
No, that's
And thank
great.
you,
And
Julie, for giving a minute.
yeah, and just for y'all to know, once I get that link from Aisha, I am more than happy to make sure we send an email tomorrow with giving you guys links. And if there's anything else that you all want to share, Adam and Aisha, please let me know, and we can make sure people get access to that after this. So Julie, I'm going to bring you up so we could start doing the
Right, and
question.
don't go away. I want you to stay on here too. There are a lot of questions in here about, some of the things that you have experienced and all of that. But I feel like I would be remiss if I did not really encourage folks to check out the redwine.blue website, check out our 160.
160.
Say what the title is, please, Julie.
160 ways to change the world without losing your shit. That's basically the title.
Check that out. Check out our Trouble Nation groups. Those are groups that you can become a part of, that or even information on how to start your own group so that you can be working in your communities. Because I saw where folks were saying this is so depressing, and it is. There's no denying that. But we have a lot of information on our website about how to fight disinformation and misinformation. The event with Jess McIntosh coming up, she always talks about that and tells us how to, and shows us how to talk to folks. So that is my commercial for Red Wine and Blue, because we have a lot of things to help with that. And we preached really hard and stood really hard about how Project 2025 would be coming and implemented and what was in it. And we still go through it on a weekly basis and update our tracker. So make sure that you're looking at that as well. Okay, so with all of that being said, a lot of folks are very, very interested in one, did you all get SF50s? I guess is something that you may need for unemployment.
I saw that
Are
question a
those
few
being given to
times.
folks?
I saw it a few times. No, we don't have anything.
Yeah,
It's
because I
a
know that was a
dry
complaint
email.
early on that, you all didn't even have what you needed to be able to file for unemployment,
We still don't.
because, okay.
Mm.
How will all you folks find new jobs? Because a lot of folks, are going to have to find something else to do. So, is there anybody, I know there's no government agency helping you all with that, but is there like a group that's out there helping folks find jobs?
I think there are multiple groups that have popped up. What I will say, federal government workers are trauma bonded right now in the best and worst way. But you're seeing so many groups pop up and combine resources, combine expertise to help you with this. There are multiple groups I know that are working together to help place for federal workers. LinkedIn, you'll see is crawling with federal workers saying, hey, I have this connection. If you have this type of expertise, this type of experience, let me know and I can put you here. We're all helping each other as best we can. Unfortunately, officially, the federal government is not assisting anyone in finding any job or landing on their feet. You're thrown to the wolves, unfortunately.
And for full disclosure too, I feel like I should say that I actually work for local government myself during the day. And so, we're having to do some cuts as well because of course, at the local levels, monies have been cut for us as well.
Yeah.
Folks
Yeah,
are
I
very
will say
concerned.
briefly on that point. I mean, it depends a lot on where you work, right? The immediate DC, Maryland, Virginia sort
Yeah.
of professional world is a bit of a bubble. And, Governor Westmore in Maryland made a point early on of saying, hey, look, we know we can't hire all of you, but obviously I'm staffing up a state administration, at least come to our job fairs, things like that. That's nice. There's certainly not nearly enough capacity, but, it's not like that's a bad thing. If you work in a regional office, if you're in Boise, or good luck. There's just not much else out there. It's different, and I will say, please don't weep for me. But there's unemployed federal workers who are ostensibly nonpartisan, who are just kind of there because of their expertise, and then there's unemployed Democrats, and nobody in Washington needs an unemployed Democrat right now. So they're kind of two different dimensions of this problem, and I think it's worth at least pointing that out briefly, only because they're kind of two different stories that you get told when you join the government in the first place, right? Aisha, I think, like many others, when you're onboarded, it's almost understood without saying it that, like, look, you're here for life if you want to be, right? You're hired because once you're here, you've made it through this gauntlet of professional checks on your background and your expertise and your knowledge, and like, we don't want to have to refill these jobs, we don't even want to have to repost these jobs. You're kind of in the system now. When you're a political appointee, it's understood on the other hand that there's no way you'll be here forever, right? It's literally impossible. So when you join up either way, you kind of think about the future very differently. When you're an appointee, your party loses, you know what's going to happen. But, and there is a but, it's also largely understood without saying that, like, you're also in the system, right? You can get a job at a think tank. You can get a job at the Rand Corporation. You can get a job in politics and government. Like, don't worry, there's a million jobs for Democrats in this town. That is not true.
Right.
A lot of people found out the hard way that is not true. And I think it's different depending on what party you're in and what year we're talking about. I think there are probably a fair number of George W. Bush people who probably didn't immediately find a job in the Republican Party in Washington, right? This is just not a good time to be a Democrat right now, professionally, in a lot of ways. And so, I have many other qualifications on my resume, but in moving to Tucson, I mean, I'm here largely for family reasons. I am looking for work. It's not like I just snapped my fingers and like I waved my Biden resume in front of, you know, the local county health department and I wowed them. Like they don't have money lying around. I don't know who does have money lying around. It's not easy. You might think we're kind of made in the background, but we're really not. Everyone's kind of looking around these days.
I too work for an elected, so trust me, I understand.
Yeah.
Uh, folks were asking about, and I think that you all touched on this. Someone asked if approvals were going slow, or do you think that rubber stamping is going to be offered for a fee? And they didn't say in regard, I think maybe in regards to the work that you were doing previously.
Yes. Um, the answer is just unequivocally yes. Rubber stamping is happening. I don't know if you've taken a look at some of the FDA initiatives coming out lately. Commissioner McCarty has promised to speed up a process that was already sped up. I think the 60 days drug review, which is not only damn near impossible, quite unsafe. There's just not enough time to review a drug to do that for safety and everything in the trials that you should. So yes, they are offering rubber stamping. If you pay a little bit more, you get your way cut down timeline. Which again, people are going companies and drug development, pharmaceutical companies, they're going to take them up on the offer. Of course, you want to get your drug to market faster. The less regulatory hurdles you have to jump through, even better. So yeah, it's going to happen. It is happening. Fully expected to keep happening as long as this administration's here.
And then there were a lot. Well, one question is, so can the insight of RIFT employees be gathered and leveraged? Is someone doing that?
Yes.
Because
Federal Workers Against DOJ is one of those organizations doing that. There are tons of them now. There are, what is it? Feds United. You're seeing other groups like the 5051 people. They're more about the protest, but they have large federal workers in there. You're seeing Stand Up for Science. There are tons of them, probably dozens now that have come up there.
Yeah.
Yep, fired but fighting. Feds work
One
for
thing I will
you.
say
Tons of them.
about Maya and Aisha's relationship is very funny. We both, I think, early on sort of recognized kindred spirits in signal groups that the public will simply never know anything about. Starting very early this year, a lot of people really started to try and figure out who was doing what, and nobody knew. There was no clearinghouse. It's not, I'm not calling them out, but it's not like the Center for American Progress put out some bat signal. Everyone was just looking around saying, who is collecting stories? Who do I even talk to? And a lot of the group that I helped form just with other HHS people was kind of, clandestinely at first trying to figure out who can we funnel stories of fired employees to on Capitol Hill for oversight purposes? What are the trustworthy class action lawsuits trying to be certified? Who's doing good labor side work? What do we do? There is no guidebook here. No one did any advanced prep. This is sort of what I was saying earlier, that I don't, I like to think I'm adaptable and I have a lot of skills, but a lot of people just kind of had to find each other through word of mouth, making a first move, proactively saying to someone on Signal, hey, I saw you in this other group. You want to talk sometime? And you just kind of had to build this yourself on this totally sort of pro bono basis. So a lot of what Aisha was saying about trauma bonding is true. A lot of people found each other just because friends of friends or groups that we were both kind of sucked into. I think there are a lot of people, Aisha and I both do comms. There are a lot of people who don't do comms who have stories that I think are frankly much more sort of emotionally impactful than ours. I mean, we are in, we're not in the best circumstances, but we have time to be here talking to you about this. I've had people who've lost family members, right? Who's collecting their stories?
And that's important. We were actually
Yes.
told in the beginnings, kind of midway for us, that we should be writing down what we are doing too. This is historic, and what you all have gone through as well. So and anybody else who is out there, your stories do need to be written down. They do need to go somewhere to be held so that they can be told as a warning, probably more than anything else for future generations, really.
Absolutely.
So kind of that last question that I asked, because somebody asked, could a new president in 2028 actually even fix this? And I think you touched on it just a little bit. I think it's going to take, I think it was you, Aisha, who said that it's going to take a lot more to put things back together than it was to tear them apart.
Yeah, I think both Adam and I are kindred spirits on that. It is it possible? Nothing's impossible. But I, like I said, I cannot even find, there are no words to demonstrate and accurately tell you the scope of what has been dismantled already, what has been lost already, the people that have left already, the knowledge that has left already, the protections that are gone already. There is no way I can explain it to you. You just can't, it's unwieldy. So, am I hopeful? Yeah. Someone could come in and I mean maybe we get us a new deal. And something like that will be the catalyst to get the train on the tracks again. But in my honest opinion, it's going to be decades probably before we're back to where we were January 19th of this year. And honestly, as far as the federal service goes, let's be honest. Do you know anyone who wants to work in the federal government right now? That's probably a whole nother hurdle and another Mount Everest to try to scale that'll probably take even more decades. So we may be back. The federal service, federal government, as you all know it, as we've all come to know it, the democracy as we've come to know it, may be back. But it's not something you can wave a magic wand for on January 20th, 2029, and it happens. It's just not. It's not realistic. I'm sorry.
Well, I just want to follow up on that really briefly. I mean, I don't disagree with the word she said. I think that it is true that one of the biggest hurdles here is not, political will. I think a lot of Democrats, if you want to win a Democratic primary, you're going to have to talk about this. You
Yep.
can't just say, well, we'll look at the budget. Like, no, that's no one's going to want to hear that talk. What we are going to have to deal with is the lack of people's interest in sort of being fed into the meat grinder. And there have to be some really ironclad guarantees, not just that like you can't be fired again anytime soon, but that what we are building the next time around is not just the same thing we had before. Because I think what we had before, as much sense as it made to the people who built it in the moment, ultimately was not self-sustaining. It did not feel to people like it was working for them or meeting their needs. It was easily demagogued. We can tell ourselves all we want about, well, substantively, everything we did was correct and Trump just lied. That's fine. Is that what people thought? Is that what people felt? Is that what worked politically? Did that message win? No, it collapsed. So we need a government that demonstrably impacts people's lives, benefits them, is responsive. That shouldn't be too much to ask, right? And so if the federal government is only ever working at this Wizard of Oz level, where we push money out the door, we wash our hands of it, we say it's not our business, it's going to be fed through the process, through contracts and grants, and we're never really going to be present. We don't know if it's helping people. It's not our job to ask. Our jobs are here in the federal building where these questions never enter into the equation. I'm not saying the Republican caricature of lazy bureaucrats is true, because it's not. I saw a lot of very hardworking people there, but I think the mentality of government is going to have to change much more toward the proactive end of the spectrum, right? We cannot just trust that everything, if done properly, is the best that we can do for the people of this country, because that's not how the public felt. That's still not how the public feels. They still think Doge is probably a good idea. They're just tired of hearing bad, case stories in their own communities. But they still think, oh, the government's too big. What is it doing for me anyway? They should see what the government is doing for them. That shouldn't be a complicated question for us to answer. We shouldn't have to duck it or talk about process or hide behind the complexity of contracting. Who cares? Nobody cares. If you have a problem, I will give one example. In Southern Arizona, this is a really paradigmatic example. In Southern Arizona, the Air Force Base, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, leaked chemicals into or near groundwater sources for a very long time, right? The city sued the Air Force not that long ago. I think the end of last year, reached about a $5 million settlement. When I was at HHS, I took a work trip out here to Tucson in 2022, I think, maybe 2023. with Admiral Levine, my boss. And I organized a series of meetings with, the city water authority, with community health advocates, with people at the University of Arizona, state health and environmental authorities, county health and environmental authorities, people who represented all these different interests. This is exactly the kind of approach I was describing earlier. To talk specifically about this, the people who live in that impacted community, what they wanted was blood testing and health screening. That's all they'd ever wanted, because they anecdotally, right, felt that, like, look, there are a really unusual number of cancers, hysterectomies, developmental disabilities in this neighborhood. We just want to know if we've been impacted. If anybody's familiar with Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, it's a very similar circumstance, right? People live in an impacted community. They don't know if they've personally been one of the people affected. They just want to find out. They want to talk to the right people, get the right testing done. To this day, most of those people have never gotten any of those tests, none of that blood work. They just don't know. At some point, if you have a legitimate need, it has to be somebody's responsibility to meet that need. If you want to know if you've been drinking contaminated water and that's why everyone in your family is getting cancer at the age of 50, what are we doing here if nobody can, like, get on the horn and make that happen? That's how people lose faith in government, is when they say, I called the city, I called the county, I called the state, I called the feds, no one ever got back to me. What am I supposed to do differently? Give me the process. I'm willing to follow the process. I'm willing to wait a year, but just, like, at the end of that, where's the pot of gold? If it's like, well, that's not a county problem, that's an Air Force problem. That's not an Air Force problem, that's an EPA problem. Well, the EPA delegated the authority to the state. Well, the state like, people don't have time and energy to navigate this process. They just want to know what's being done. And again, that's across the board, right? If you live in a community where when it rains, sewage comes up through your pipes. I've been to those communities too. If anybody knows Cahokia Heights, Illinois, or East St. Louis, Illinois, I've been there. When it rains, and this is in largely Black communities, sewage, raw sewage, comes up through your pipes. And at the end of the day, they are tired of hearing about how it's nobody's responsibility to fix it. No one's going to get rich fixing those pipes. That's why government exists. It's to eliminate the profit motive when people have legitimate community needs. And if the government can't hop to, at the end of the day, people are going to lose faith. So we need to build something that is a little more community responsive and a little more immediate and a little more goal oriented next time around. That's a project I think a lot of people can get behind. And that's not something that's going to take 30 years for public buy-in, but it needs people who have that vision and are willing to back it up with action. That's the path forward here.
Well, with that, I'm going to have to kick this back over to Julie because we are past time. This was great though. Very, very informative, and there's lots of work to do, and lots of groups that you can connect to try to make that happen. But Julie, I'll go.
Thank you. So I just stopped the chat just for a second. I wanted to drop the links that Julie mentioned earlier, which is we have a Trouble Nation program, which is how you can look for a group near you or start a group if you want to organize locally. Red, Wine, and Blue are all about when they go low, we go local, because we know that is where the power is. That's where you can make an impact. And, if they're doing stuff at the federal level and they're going to be destroying government or taking away contracts and services, we need strong school boards. We need strong city councils. We need people who are going to stand up to this. So local is super important. So check out Trouble Nation. And also you can check out our guide about 160 ways to change the world, because it gives you things that you can tangibly do. It's going to take all of us doing all of the things. And the reason I really wanted you to hear these stories tonight was because it's so important that we are sharing this information with our family and friends. We are all about friend-to-friend organizing. You can have these conversations at your next happy hour with your friends, with your family, at a meal. Take Aisha's videos, put them on social, start conversations, because people aren't paying attention. They're checking out, right? From the news, it's so much, it's overwhelming. So we need to make sure we're having these conversations, and that's how we fight back. So anyways, I do want to just say thank you so much to Aisha and Adam for being here tonight, for sharing their stories, and fighting the good fight for this and for all of us. We really appreciate that. Okay, I will start I'm going to start the chat again just real quick. And so if anybody wants to say goodbye, please drop it in the chat.
I've actually got a really, really quick formatting question. I have a couple, as Julie said earlier, I would be remiss if I didn't offer a couple book recommendations. And I also want to know if we're able, in the email you send around to people, will we be able to give our contact info? Like if people want to reach Aisha or reach me, Could
Yep.
be, okay, that's great. So I
There
will
is
send you.
actually a
Have a
report
seat.
in the chat looking for that. For those who are new, we take all the questions in the chat. It just runs smoothly and easier for us to do it that way. So if you have your hands up, we're not ignoring you. It's just we found this is a smoother way to do it. But if you want to give your contact info out, feel free. I'm happy to share it.
Okay, I will send all that along to you this evening, and hopefully we'll see that tomorrow. That sounds great.
Look
Right.
for me on LinkedIn. Aisha Coffee. You'll see it. It's an FDA with our background with RFK yelling at a sock puppet. So
That's fair. They'll be able to find you.
you'll find
Yes.
me.
So look for an email tomorrow. Check your spam later in the day if you don't get it. But we do have a resource page, and I will send that, and I'll put up all the information that both Adam and Aisha sent to me. So, okay. Well, thank you very much to our speakers. Thank you for coming, publicly speaking out, and being brave about sharing your stories and what's really going on. And everyone here, please share that information out to your friends and family. And we will hopefully see you Thursday, where we're going to talk about tariffs and the impact on small businesses. So we will see you all. Have a good evening.